Hey everyone, this is Dwayne Monroe with Dialectical House Party. I'm here with Alkmi, and we are doing part 2 of our conversation about dialectical materialism and materialist dialectics. And in the last show, we left off talking about category pairs. And in this program, in this recording, we're going to be covering the following essence phenomena, followed by content form, necessity accident, reason result, and particular general. And there are a few other, I'm going to say more granular aspects of this. As before, this is a structured conversation between Alkmi and I, in which Alkmi will do a nice presentation for us of these concepts. And then I will ask some questions to help illustrate, to help illuminate, to shine a greater light. So without further ado, Brother Alkmi, please take the stage.
Annyeonghaseyo, everyone. Thank you, brother Comrade Dwayne. Gracias. I'm just going to be continuing where we left off from last time. So thank you for having me back. Thank you for your attention and your interest. Just a brief recap. Like Comrade Dwayne said, we are starting to go down the list of these universal relationships in materialist dialectics, specifically from the Vietnamese Marxist-Leninist curriculum written by the Vietnamese Education Ministry. If any of you want to follow along with some of the pedagogical material, this is all basically based on Luna Nguyen's translation of the Vietnamese curriculum for Marxism-Leninism, available at banyanhousepublishing.com. I'm sorry if my false background's not letting you see this properly. You guys can download this for free for the ebook version, or purchase it for $20 to $22 for mail and shipment for the paper copy. If you all want a greater in-depth look at some of the topics I'm going to be discussing and some of its history, its purposes, and the totality of the knowledge system I'm referring to as materialist dialectics, I highly recommend you all go and watch my Saturdays with Renee appearances on Black Liberation Media. We'll link all of this in the description. But essentially, this is where I give a much more in-depth kind of look into what materialist dialectics is for, what some of its roles are, and how we use it in depth as a totality. Here, we'll be diving more specifically into the 6 universal philosophical category pairs of materialist dialectics, more specifically where we left off from last time with Brother Dwayne, essence and phenomenon, followed by content and form, necessity and accident, reason and result, in particular and general. But I apologize if it seems like I'm jumping right into the middle of this for some of you new viewers. I highly recommend you going back and watching all my previous appearances of discussing these topics in case you want maybe more of a starting from the ground up perspective. But I apologize for not starting from that perspective from this structured talk. There's simply no time. So we just wanted to put these resources out there so as many people as possible can start using these tools in their everyday analysis, in their everyday praxis, and in making sense of the events of the world around them. That's what these are for, you all. These are basically categories that can be applied to anything, phenomenon, process, or situation in the natural world, in human society or human thought, that allows us to best perceive the material objective world in order to transform it. So getting started right off the bat, Comrade Dwayne, we're talking about essence and phenomenon. This is a category pair that essentially deals with the internal nature of things and how that internal nature is externalized and expresses itself to the outside world. Now, the Vietnamese Marxist-Leninist curriculum says that the essence category is defined by a synthesis of all the internal stable relationships that define a thing as what it is and drive its motion, development, and change all throughout its lifetime. So for any Marxist-Leninists in the audience or already dialectical materialists, a thing's fundamental contradiction is essentially the same thing in this context as its essence. Essence can not be perceived directly. It can only be understood indirectly through the ways it externally manifests itself. This is what the category phenomenon refers to. Phenomenon in the Vietnamese Marxist-Leninist curriculum is any thing, event, or process that human senses can perceive. So it can be an event, it can be a person, it can be the appearance or the existence of a species on the planet or a population of biological life forms. But with regards to essence, you all, phenomenon is the way that essence externally and conditionally manifests itself to the outside world. And all phenomenon are the external, temporary, fleeting manifestations of an internal essence. Now, this is basically the root of all scientific thought, you all, because essentially dialectical materialism and Marxism-Leninism understands that the inner nature of things can be understood by humans and can be observed, but only through practice and study and through understanding the essence of that thing under many, many different conditions. Because the same essence can manifest itself through many different phenomena under the many different conditions. The process of coming to know something's internal nature is to see as many phenomena that it exudes as possible in order to find the common connections between them to come to know a thing's internal relationships that define it. Luna Nguyen's book uses a great example of a mundane cloud. You can take a cloud as a subject to analyze. The essence of a cloud, or the stable internal synthesis of relationships that define it, is essentially H2O molecules that have collected to a high enough density, to a high enough altitude in the air, in the atmosphere, under certain particular conditions of heat and humidity and pressure, in order to coalesce into the subject we know as a cloud. The essence of a cloud are H2O water molecules built up to a sufficient density and altitude in the atmosphere. Phenomena that we may be able to sense from the cloud that gives us clues and glimpses into its essence and its inner nature might be things like a shadow on the ground, might be things like a rainstorm or thunder and lightning, or maybe even turbulence on an airplane flight as you as a human passenger and a subject in an airplane are moving through a cloud. The phenomenon of something the Vietnamese say are always fleeting and conditional. They may appear or disappear given certain conditions, but the essence of things tends to be relatively stable, you all, and does not change throughout a whole thing's lifetime until it perishes and turns into something else, as humans do, as capitalism will, as clouds will. So I think the main lesson the Vietnamese want us to understand, you all, is that this pair is what allows us to understand how external appearances, manifestations of things, are really just partial glimpses, but still necessary into understanding its internal nature. To understand anything, you all, you need to understand its essence. That's what most of the sciences are about, from computer sciences to physics. We're understanding the motion of Brownian Newtonian bodies of matter in motion. We're understanding the processes that give rise to the syntheses of chemicals and new compounds or molecules. We're understanding the network and the lattice of systems that are arranged and function in order to give us what we call the internet or computer or intelligence systems. The essence is not able to be observed directly, but the Vietnamese say the best you can is to understand a thing and its essence under as many different diverse conditions externally as possible, and see all the different phenomena that essence exudes in different situations in order to have an idea in your head of what the essence of something is. Why you need to know that is because if you know the essence, you'll know where a thing is going to move in its general trend of development, as well as its inner nature. But go ahead, Comrade.
Well, the cloud example is really great because, sure, as you said, what is the basis of clouds is H2O, water. And therefore that's the essence. And also, as you said, but the cloud is a phenomena, perhaps you could also say a manifestation, one of the many possible manifestations of water as an essence, so this is really important because I think that the way that we tend to think, if we were trained in the West is that, things, and we've mentioned this in our previous conversation, things are slotted, and not that, there can be a foundation to things, but it can then present itself into reality in a sense, in different ways, which is actually quite beautiful. And the sort of thing that, people who've read different types of science fiction novels, for example, might be familiar with. And of course,
this is everywhere in science, Comrade. Absolutely.
Yeah, and in science, it's all over. And we also talked last time about how scientists can, see these things within their fields, but then often not apply it to politics. But we talked about that the last time. But carry on.
Yeah, Comrade. Thank you. I appreciate it. And please feel free to bring in any geopolitical, analytical, or real world, real life examples as you see fit. That's the point. We need to understand the world to change it, right? But I like starting off with scientific examples, you all, or examples of phenomenon in everyday life that exude these or embody these concepts, because it's not that I want to depoliticize the concepts we're talking about. I'm a Marxist-Leninist. We have to make everything political, right? Or we have to understand everything as political. But rather, I want to show you all that these can be applied to literally any aspect of objective material reality, even in human thought, even in the most mundane examples of traffic or weather or the non-political particular sciences. These, as the Vietnamese Marxist-Leninists understand, these are universal relationships. These 6 category pairs that we're going to be going over in this series with you all. These are 6. They're not all of the universal relationships. There may be more, like 21, but that's neither here nor there. That's the subject of my own studies. These 6 universal relationships exist in diversity across all of the material universe, in every single process, system, event, historical or future or potential or actually existing. Every single material diverse thing or system contains and is an expression of these universal relationships. In a non-metaphysical kind of way, these are just 12 or 6 different faces of the philosophical understanding of matter, which is just objective existence outside the human consciousness, right? All matter, things made out of matter, you all, from atoms to human thoughts to human social formations, are subject to these relationships and are diverse, unique, particular embodiments of the essence phenomenon relationship, the reason result relationship, the general particular relationship, the possibility reality relationship, the content form relationship. So that's why these as analytics can be used to analyze everything in life, from political movement of matter to the mundane, to clouds and meteorology, to computer sciences and your everyday interpersonal relationships. So our intention is to help you all eventually use these to understand how to politically move in the world and how to apply these to political movement and political analysis. But I just want to start off with mundane examples to show you all that they are literally universal and fundamentally applicable. And every level of matter has its own particular laws of motion, as Marxist-Leninists understand. But these particular laws or relationships I'm going to be giving you are shared across all levels of organization of matter. So if you can understand these for clouds and your relationship with your partner, you can understand how to apply these to the righteous war that the Islamic Republic of Iran is waging on the U.S. imperialist, white supremacist, North Atlantic fascist empire, or the war that the Palestinians are doing to decolonize their country from the illegal entity of the Zionist occupation known as Israel. These dialectical relationships govern and express the motion of matter across all fields, but they do not replace you understanding the particular laws of motion and relationships of matter in each individual field of science. Like I said last time, specific sciences are a particular form of dialectics. Materialist dialectics and dialectical materialism is the universal form of dialectics in motion. And remember, you all, dialectics is all about how everything is defined by and composed of relationships, and everything's always changing all the time due to relationships. A particular kind of relationship, which everything shares, which is the dialectical contradiction, a temporary unity of opposing sides. By the way, you all, these 6 pairs are just different faces or 6 different manifestations or angles through which the universal relationship of the dialectical contradiction manifests itself. So basically, you all, the fact that everything's made of 2 opposing temporarily unified forces manifests itself in the fact that everything has an essence that's defined by a phenomenon and externally manifests itself through the fact that everything has a potential to transform into something it's not, and a current state that defines what it is. Each of these pairs, you all, is kind of like a different face or a different slice of the fact that dialectical contradiction is what defines every particular universal thing. So anyways, when it comes to essence and phenomenon, Comrade, just to wrap it up, a great example that Luna's book gives is a lesson that this pair reminds us to hold is that you should never mistake the phenomenon of something for its essence. This is something that happens in the metaphysical and idealist world a lot, in the non-dialectical materialist tradition of thinking, which is you may only be content with judging a thing and its internal, or your perception of its internal character based on its external outward appearances or manifestations. The dialectical materialist tradition says this is not sufficient. In order to fully know something, you need to understand that there's a separation between the internal relationships that define it, whatever that is. A human may be defined by metabolism and consumption and metabolic production. An economy may be defined by economic consumption and production, supply and demand, and laws of exchange and laws of surplus value. You can't see these laws or these relationships that define anything, but you can come to understand them gradually over time through observing the same thing under multiple different conditions that cause different phenomena or different glimpses of its internal relationships that define it to leak out of it, essentially. And the Vietnamese understand that once you separate the fact that outward manifestations are an imperfect or partial glimpse, but not the full glimpse of something's internal nature and its defining character, this allows us to not make the mistake of, I don't know, something like the US showing that it might be in some ways pro-woman or pro-LGBT or pro-worker. But its essence has always been the same since it was formed. It was a genocidal empire based on land theft, theft of bodies, theft of African people and of indigenous people's land, of theft of surplus value of its workers, and theft of literally of the capacity for social nature to reproduce itself. Shout out to Ali Qadri. The essence of the US empire, for example, to use a political instant, has never changed. Its internal relationships that define it are of theft, of taking of surplus value, to shunt it and to push it upwards into an owner class that is not productive and only engages in the multiplication of capital via MCM. the phenomenon that the capitalist American social formation may exude may change over time. Under different conditions, the essence and the internal defining relationships of a bloodthirsty, genocidal, surplus value stealing, land grabbing, enslaving empire may look like LGBT pride parades, may look like innovations in cellular or computer or intelligence technology that was only predicated off of the theft of third world people, resources, and labor. The phenomenon of the US may look like IMF loans and World Bank loans to underdeveloped third world or imperial periphery countries. But I think the Vietnamese Marxist-Leninists would just remind us it would be a mistake to understand that the US is defined by these outward manifestations that it engages in or produces as a result of existing. You would need to understand, in this example, many different situations that the USA has acted under, behaved under. You need to understand you can never understand the infinity of all the phenomena that something produces as a result of its essence externalizing you all. But the Vietnamese dialectical materialist tradition would say you must work as much as possible to understand as many different phenomena under as many different conditions of a thing as possible. And you will asymptotically reach a point of eventually understanding its internal relationships that are unseen and hidden, but much more important than its outward manifestations, in order to understand the direction of development of something. If the US is built on theft, it inevitably will eventually undermine its own means of existence, right? That comes from understanding its essence. But essence is mediated through a thing's phenomenon and is not something you can understand right away about something. You can only understand essence through diverse external manifestations. So they cannot always look the same, but the Vietnamese materialist dialectics would say you need to start with a thing's phenomenon and eventually pierce to the core of a thing's essence. And essence is stable. It won't change over time, even though phenomenon will, and they're fleeting and they're conditional. They may appear or disappear under different conditions. But one must always understand essence is primary. Phenomenon is just the puppet that essence manifests through. Do you have any more questions before we move on from that, Comrade? Sorry if that was unclear for anyone.
No, actually, not a question, but just another way of stating it, which is people may understand, say, trend analysis, right? That is to say that, or time series data, which is used in data analytics, or even more down to earth or less technical. We all know people, and we may not want to use essence to describe them because that may be a bit too on the nose.
There's baggage. There's some philosophical baggage as well with that.
Yeah, with talking about the essence of a human being. However, there are
from this viewpoint, from this particular viewpoint,
from this particular viewpoint, yeah, there are people whose behavior may at times seem one way, but the trend of their behavior, let's just say the essence of their behavior, remains unchanged. Someone who is emotionally or physically abusive, who makes you a nice breakfast, if the conditions that make them abusive have not changed, then the phenomena of them making you a nice breakfast does not change the particular essence of their longer term behaviors. And I think this is a way to apply
Absolutely.
this to, like, in our everyday life, and even things that are less, say, even nonviolent relationships. If you're working for a corporation whose a goal is profit, you should, even if they provide a nice breakout room with donuts, that doesn't change the essence of the corporation, which is profit maximization, right?
They're not defined by the donuts; they're defined by profit maximization.
Precisely, but that is the essence. Yeah, that is the essence of the organization, is profit maximization, not the donuts that you got on Tuesday, or the pizza, or or what have you, that people will then mistake for being the essence of the organization, because they mistake the phenomena of that moment for the essence of the organization.
Absolutely. And how do I know the essence of the organization, Dwayne? If you're telling me don't think the donuts are it, well, what, are you just not giving me an answer? No, you have to observe the organization in many different situations,
over
not
time,
just when it's giving donuts, when it's hurting people, when it's not hurting people, when it's interacting with new employees. Then you can build in your mind a picture of what are the common features shared between these different instances of external manifestation.
And people do
this is how we can define the essence of something. Mm-hmm.
We do this naturally. We are pattern observing animals, right? But we are discouraged.
The essence is the common pattern shared throughout all phenomenon.
Precisely. But we are discouraged from making these connections. We are encouraged to mistake the phenomena for the essence, because doing so supports the propaganda efforts of various elites.
Yes.
Yes. So yeah, and I wanted to offer that as a way to ground this so that people say, this is how you can apply this to your daily life.
Absolutely, Comrade. No, thank you. You anticipate me as always. I'll move on from this after two examples, but Luna's book also says the reason why we don't want to mistake phenomenon for essence is because oftentimes this can lead to false consciousness. It can lead to misapprehending what the true nature of something is just based on an incomplete and an incorrect and a interrupted process of coming to know a thing as it actually is based on its internal relationships. Materialist dialectics always says, remember you guys, that a thing is defined by its relationships. So if you want to understand something, you need to understand particularly its internal relationships. You cannot see a thing's internal relationships, but you can trust that as long as a thing is going to be what it is under many different changes and phases and conditions throughout its life, that set of relationships will remain the same. It's unseen, it's invisible, it's below the surface, but they will speak for themselves. They will allow you glimpses. I'm going to be a little poetic and ripe right now. It's the coffee probably, but it's going to show you tiny little peeks into the soul, or basically the internal defining system of something that gives it its characteristics, its properties, and its trend of development. Because in materialist dialectics, a thing's identity is actually linked to its course and pathway and general tendency of its development. Those two concepts are linked together through the concept of and the relationship of the dialectical contradiction. That's why the essence of something is, you can say, its fundamental contradiction, the unity of opposing forces that will define it all throughout the course of all the phases of its lifetime, as long as it exists as what it does. Luna's book says that you cannot mistake phenomenon for essence, because that would be an incomplete process of coming to understand the relationships of something. And this will lead to things like neoliberalism or fascism or bigotry. Misunderstanding the internal nature of something only based on its external appearances is basically the start and the basis of false consciousness, or in the Marxist tradition, consciousness, human reflection of objective matter that is not lined up with objective reality. Human mind that is not reflecting properly what is beyond it. So the human mind can understand the internal characteristics and relationships of something, from a corporation to a fascist social formation like the USA, but only through practice, through observing particular instances of particular phenomenon that are exuded from a general set of relationships or contradiction. And I guess 2 or 3 more examples would be, my bicycle is a relational subject whose essence would define it as, well, a metal bar, a rubber wheel that's arranged in a certain spatial relationship to its body, a leather seat designed for human use of sitting prone while operating the vehicle with one's legs and one's arms, and a handlebar. A bicycle set of internal relationships that define it, you all, is basically a machine that was built using surplus labor to allow a human to operate it and move across space in a way that's much more efficient, using wheels and laws of motion based on Newtonian physics, more efficient than walking. The essence of a bicycle is a machine made for moving around faster than walking. Phenomenon you might see those inner relationships manifest them through, you all, could be things like a honking horn on my little, my little bicycle. I can't even remember the English word, beeper or horn. You might hear spokes spinning. You might observe a person moving across the ground really fast on a little vehicle with 2 wheels. That's a phenomenon too. It's anything you can observe. You might see rust building up and developing on the bike over time if I don't properly store it in the conditions that would allow it to be free of radical oxidation from water and from air. You might observe me taking my bicycle to a store when enough quantity changes of wear and tear have been built up in its structural apparatus that leads to a quality shift of it going from being a new bike to a broken bike. These are all ways that my bicycle, as a machine built for transporting human butts and human weight, shows itself to the outside world. You can't see that essence of a bike, but you can infer it based on a lot of common observances of particular bicycles in motion, in use, in disrepair, and in repair that other human subjects around you, both you and not you, have seen. The essence of my dog is a biological organism. I don't really have a dog that has 4 legs that evolved from Canis lupus, the wolf, that needs to eat and it needs to shit and waste its metabolic resources. It needs to grow, mature, and eventually die. It has fur, and it evolved out of the canine family. Phenomenon from my dog that those internal relationships might show to the outside world is a tail wagging, is whining when he doesn't have food to eat, is asking me to go outside so he can relieve himself of metabolic waste processes that are intrinsic to his biological system, or of a bill on my wallet at the end of every month to pay for my little furry friend. These are all events that occur out of my dog and out of my relationship with my dog. But they're really the dog's internal relationship showing itself to the outside world. If the Marxist-Leninists would only take a look and see with a discerning eye how these all are related in the common essence of a little furry 4-legged friend. And finally, I'm just using stuff around my apartment, Comrade, to show it's from the political to non-political. A door in my apartment is defined by the internal relationships of its frame to, if it's attachment to my door frame, of the internal relationships of the wood, maybe even the termites in the wood, slowly degrading it over time through quantitative shifts, of the fixtures that have been designed into my door to allow it to function, such as a peephole, such as a lock, such as latches and nails to hold the latches on. And of course, an area underneath that allows air to be free for the door to slide in and out of its being used. That's its essential relationships, you all. My door is basically just a plank of wood that's attached to my wall in a hole in the wall that can open up and close to allow the internal and external of my apartment to be fluid and relative, and to allow visitors or outgoers in and out. That's the essence of my door. That's its internal relationships that define it. Phenomenon you might see from those internal relationships, you all, is under the conditions of, wear and tear over the course of like many years, the door might develop splits in its frame. It might develop an imperfect, it might develop imperfections in its ability to partition the inside and the outside of my apartment. It might develop rust on the parts that involve movement of the door, like its hinges or its locks. The phenomenon are just hints and clues and little, like I said, glimpses of a thing's internal nature. Everything has one, but materialist dialectics tells you must start at the surface level of something and then go deeper after continuous, diverse, practical analysis and manipulation of an object, or observances. If we're talking about political events, I can't hold Iran in my hand. I can't hold Trump, genociding Palestine in my hand. But when it comes to geopolitics, you guys, we can keep up with the news. We can listen to a set of perspectives that are materially and objectively grounded in what's actually objectively happening throughout the process of a war or a recession or economic movements of global value chains that deprive the global south of its human resources. You can observe those, and you can understand the reality that's happening through many different channels and modes of communication in order to build an understanding of the essence of something in your head when it comes to things like a war or geopolitical occurrences. So this will be diverse, you guys. You will not always be able to use the same methods to understand the essence of all the diverse things in the universe. But a general guideline is you have to start at the surface level of something, and you have to observe something in many, many different circumstances. And then you can eventually come to gradually understand the internal relationships that are stable, that will last all throughout a thing's lifetime, that are expressing themselves through these external events. All right. So we'll move on to content and form now. This is a pair that essentially has to do with the structure of things. And I usually tell people in a very kind of right brain and kind of philosophical way, content and form is the relationship, the universal relationship that allows us to understand and locate where the change and development in a thing is going to occur. Content and form is, in practical terms, it allows us to harness laws and tendencies of development and motion to allow things to develop and be changed in ways that are suitable to our ends, and allows us to perceive and preempt changes that are not suitable for ends. And I'll break it down to you like this. Content is the summation of all the constitutive elements of something that makes something what it is. So it's the substance of something. Now, a lot of people confuse this with essence, but in a very brief way, the substance is just what I'm made out of. My essence is not everything I'm made out of, just the internal relationships that define me. So the essence is more of the soul or the character of something. The content is everything that is enclosed within the boundary of what a thing is. So as a human, my content is essentially carbon and nitrates, phosphates, ribonucleic acids, carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, right? My essence as a human is more the abstract relationship of the forces of entropy on the one hand, struggling against the forces of catabolism and the building up of my body and the maintenance of my biological form on the other hand. Essence is more about the contradictions that define something, the relationships. Content is basically just the substance that something's made out of, okay? Form is basically all of the internal interrelationships between the constitutive elements of something that hold it together or give it a modality of existence. The easy way of saying that is form is just the structure or the organization or the arrangement of something's essence, right? And so what materialist dialectics in the Vietnamese understanding wants us to internalize is that why we make this distinction in observing any relational subject or anything between a content and a form, the aspect of it that's its content and the aspect of it that's its form, is because these have two opposing tendencies of motion. This is where the motion of something and the change and the development of any given thing, from a war to a person to a relationship to a book, actually originate from. And it goes like this, you all. The content of something has a tendency to always constantly change throughout time. My cells are aging and expending themselves. They're generating oxidative radicals that will eventually degrade my DNA's ability to keep dividing itself and allow my body to keep maintaining itself as a biological existence. The content of a chair is always degrading over time, wearing down. The substance of the wood and the nails and the metal and the plastic that's made out of are constantly undergoing motion and molecular reactions that are leading to the eventual degrading and the undermining of its structural ability to hold itself together. The content of something has a tendency towards constant change, right? We can explain that, why that is later. But the form of something, on the other hand, has a tendency of stability and of resisting change. And this is where this pair is really important, you all, because what this wants us to understand is that the change in anything from feudalism to capitalism of a social formation to a teenager turning into an adult through the process of quantitatively building up numbers of units of time that we call age and years in the Gregorian calendar, or the tendency of possibly a situation of a war or a relationship between two countries to go south, if you will. That always starts with the content changing via quantitative shifts. Shout out to Black Liberation Media. Shout out to my appearance on Saturdays with Renee. Please go back and watch my second episode if you need to make sense of the law of quantity and quality. But essentially, this pair, Comrade Duane and audience, is related to the law of quantity and quality. It says that as a thing is aging or developing or going through motion, it always has to build up shifts or changes of quantities of countable aspects of itself, of magnitude, of speed, of weight, of mass, of any vector that can be reduced down into a countable number. The countable aspects of any process or thing, Comrade Duane, have to change and build up to a certain threshold before its fundamental identity and its properties that differentiate from others, its qualities, can change. A glass of water can only freeze into a block of ice or evaporate into a cloud of steam if I first push its quantity of its temperature of degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit to a certain threshold where it will lose the quality of being liquid, and it will undergo a phase shift into gas. And shout out to your field of study, eventually plasma, if you ionize it, or if you make it lose enough quantity of temperature of degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit, it will eventually undergo a phase shift of losing its quality of liquid to assume a quality of being solid. We understand that all processes in the universe that undergo change, which is all processes, have to undergo a buildup of quantity shifts to a certain range that's particular to every single process and condition before its fundamental identity or its quality can change. That's what us Marxist-Leninists say. What does this have to do with content and form alchemy? Quite simply, when all things undergo development, which is the unity of quantity and quality shifts, eventually into a transformation, into a higher state, into a new thing, the content of something is going to be where its quantity shifts build up and happen first. The inside substance that a thing is made out of is where the quantity shifts of things occur. The inside of the cup of water is where the quantity shifts of the degrees Fahrenheit building up occur. The quantity shifts of the molecules of plastic and carbon and wood and metal of my chair are where the content is building up quantity shifts in order to prepare for its quality shift of turning into a broken chair. The content of my cells, my tissues, my organs, and my molecules, my macroorganic molecules that my cells are made out of, are where the quantity shifts in myself as an organism, as a human being, occur before I undergo the quality shift of becoming an adult from a teenager or going from being a living body to a dead body eventually. The form of something does not like to change, and it will only change once a certain threshold of quantity shifts in a thing's content has changed, which will then cause the form to have to rearrange itself radically and undergo a quality shift, at which point the result would be the thing having a new content and a new form. To be completely material and less abstract about this, if any Marxist-Leninists are in the audience, or anarchists or socialists, this is exactly the relationship that Marx and Engels described when we're discussing modes of production of social economic formations of human societies undergo transitions. This is what Marx is referring to when he says, at the start of any given phase of a mode of production of a social economic formation, the productive forces are in agreement or align with the relations of production. This is getting into historical materialism. We're not here to talk about that right now. This is not a Marxism lesson. It's a dialectical materialism lesson. But for all you who already know, the productive forces of society is basically the machinery that society needs to reproduce itself, from the land to the trade routes to the human labor involved, right? People work on nature and they transform it. The relations of production are the governing structures that govern how the products of nature and metabolism and labor get distributed. Basically, for all you who already know, when the productive forces, which are always undergoing quantity shifts, have been built up to a certain point, they will come to be in disagreement with or contradiction with the relations of production. At that point, that's what we call a revolution will occur, where the social relations of production rearrange themselves to better suit the productive forces having changed. This relationship, you all, is the same relationship as quantity, as content and form. In this example, you all, with Marxian political economy and historical materialism, the productive forces of a society, its machinery needed to reproduce itself, which are constantly undergoing quantitative shifts of growing and developing, especially under capitalism. Because as Marx said, capitalism always needs to revolutionize the means of production, blah, blah, blah. The productive forces of a society, you all, is the content of society. The relations of production is the form of society, or the way that the content is arranged. Now, all that this pair wants us to understand is that at the beginning of the existence of anything, its content and its form will correspond to each other. They'll agree with each other. But eventually, they will come to mismatch. They will come to misalign because content always likes to change and form likes to stay the same. Once a certain degree of content has changed to the point where it doesn't agree with the form anymore, a rearrangement has to occur where the form basically takes on a new organizational modality of existence in order to accommodate the new content. This is what the Vietnamese Marxist-Leninists mean when they say form is determined by content, but it has an impact back on content. It can either suitably, I don't want to use ableist language, I'm not going to say the R word, but it can restrain and constrain the development of a content when it does not correspond to or match a thing's content that has now undergone enough quantity shifts where the two don't correspond to each other anymore. Or it can help and basically suitably allow for further development of a thing's content if it is arranged in a suitable modality. It's up to humans and Marxist-Leninists and scientific revolutionaries to intervene and to rearrange a thing's form when it no longer suits its content. I need to give my chair a new frame, a new set of wheels. I need to give my car a new body paint when enough of its content has aged and changed to the point where it no longer suits its form. And the form now is hurting the development of the content on my car or my chair. These are very vague terms, you all. I want you to jump in, Comrade, but I just want to say the Vietnamese say viewpoint being relative is extremely important for this pair. Whether or not something's form is constraining the development of its quantity, or if it's helping, is completely relative based on the viewer and the observer and the actor. But there are some generalities we can apply, which is content and form are different from each other, and they can be made to either help or hurt each other's development. So we need to, as revolutionaries, observe a thing's content first, in as many different diverse examples of how matter exists, in order to see whether the form it currently is occupied by is suiting its content or is hurting the development of its content. But go ahead, Comrade. Make the necessary intervention needed. Mm-hmm.
I think that it'll be helpful to the audience to dive a little more into the specific meaning of quality in this context, because the word quality.
Sure. I apologize for shorthanding that.
Well, no, it's fine. It's fine because it has a precise meaning in dialectical materialism and materialist dialectics. However, as you know, it's a commonly used word. It's used in advertising. It's used in everything. You know, like, oh, this is a high quality cup of coffee, for example. And so I think it would be useful to zero in on precisely how the word quality is used within this context.
Of course, Comrade, and please jump in anytime what I'm saying is too abstract or not making enough sense. Usually, I'm used to a live chat and more of an active dialogue that helps keep me sharp. I'm not saying I don't like these formats either, but please interrupt me whenever you feel necessary. Whenever I'm being too abstract or philosophical, I want to talk like a normal person, but sometimes you have to show that there's a deeper level than normal people talk. Exactly. I'm just trying to balance the dialectic with you. That's all. Every crowd is different. No, thank you. No, I will. So in a very short way of describing what Duane says, the materialist dialectical definition of quality as a category, as a philosophical category, is not the way that you're used to hearing it in the metaphysical idealist tradition of common U.S. Imperial core white Bucra land everyday people speak. When we are using the word quality here, you all, comrades, quality in the materialist dialectical Vietnamese Marxist-Leninist tradition means the aspects of anything, phenomenon, process, or idea that differentiate it from anything that it is not. It is the aspects of something that refer to its essential properties, its characteristics that differentiate it from anything that it is not. I have the quality of being Okinawan. I have qualities you could describe of being an East Asian that supports the Palestinian liberation movement. That's why I'm wearing a keffiyeh on my neck. I have a quality of having a ponytail. I have qualities of being, well, this is kind of more of a quantity. I am a less than middle-aged man, cisgendered man, because I'm in my 30s. These are all aspects that differentiate me from Duane or from my book. I'm not giving any tea on Duane's age, or my book or my laptop. I'm not the same thing as a cup of water. I'm not the same thing as I even was as the same person 5 seconds ago, because I've developed since then. All things do, whether you're biological or whether you're a non-biological piece of matter. Quality, Comrade Duane, in materialist dialectics is the aspects of something that differentiate it from that which it is not. Now that seems very woo-woo, but the reason why materialist dialectics defines it like that, you all, is because one, the aspects of something that are countable is the opposite of its qualities. Those are its quantities. These are things that are measurable, like my weight, my height, my speed, my velocity. Any quality can be quantized into a quantity too, because as you and me's background sciences show, right, Comrade? The color red, which is a quality in certain viewpoints and perspectives, is also a quantity of a certain amount of nanometers of photons from another perspective. The fact that my computer is black and gray are qualities that it has that allow it to be differentiated from other computers that are not black and gray, or other things that are not computers, like my phone or the pieces of paper on my very messy desk setup right here, or my apartment, or anything that's not my computer. These black and gray hues my computer has on its body differentiate it from things that it is not. But even those qualities, Comrade Dwayne, can be broken down into quantities of pigment, of nanometers of photon that they reflect or absorb, that give us the subjective human perception of something having the color of gray or red. Quantities and qualities are unified in Vietnamese dialectical materialism. You guys, if I'm not making any sense to you, please go back and watch my Saturdays with Renee appearances. My point is, quality has to do with all of the aspects of something that are not its countable aspects. In materialist dialectics, we have to both identify. We have to define something by both what its internal relationships define it as well as what it is not. This gets very deep into philosophy, but you all, if essentially differentiability and sameness is two opposing but unified aspects that all things in the material universe, including processes, systems, and human ideas and thoughts and things of nature, possess. All things have sameness with all other things. And all things are different than all other things as well. This is what the Vietnamese Marxist-Leninist understanding of the principle of general relationships teaches us. But when it comes to quality, you all, that's why we have to incorporate both a thing's essence, its internal relationships, as well as basically a negation of what it is not. Everything's quality is both an affirmation and a negation in a materialist philosophical way of speaking. So to circle back around to your answer, Comrade Dwayne, a quality is not the countable aspects of something. Yeah. It is not a thing's number, temperature, weight, height, motion, speed, velocity. And it is all the aspects that are not it. It is its differentiable characteristics. And what does that mean, Alkmi? It's just any relationship that I have as a thing or an aspect that defines me against something I'm not. That's technically quality in the most basic sense.
And in the text, a lovely example is given of the quantity and quality shift between a seed, a seedling, an immature plant, and a mature plant. You know, because you've had a quality shift. That
it undergoes a change in identity as it grows.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yes. Because a seed is clearly not the same thing as a fully developed plant. You know, so you can see the quality shift there, right? Even though there is a linkage and a commonality there, but there has been a quality shift, a shift in how it's presenting itself into the material world.
It gained new identities as it went through new quality shifts over time, of old qualities being replaced by new qualities. What Dwayne and I are talking about right here, all of this put together, that's what the Vietnamese Marxist-Leninists call development, you guys. Development is, you can describe a lot of things in materialist dialectics on many different levels of definitions, at least 3. So please pardon me if that seems like I'm being contradictory. I'm not. I'm just explaining the same thing on multiple different levels of deepness, right? I just said qualities are the properties and the differentiable aspects of something that are not its countable qualities, countable aspects, right? Countable. Here's a deeper level saying the same exact fucking shit. Development, and when it comes to development, to Comrade Dwayne, to your point, development is just quantity shifts building up to quality shifts with a tendency of forward motion of things going from less advanced to more advanced. Yes. Another way of explaining that same exact philosophical category is development is the process of old qualities going away and giving rise to new qualities. That's another way of explaining the same thing. Here's another way of explaining the same thing. The seed go to the plant, to the fruits, to the new seeds. These are all new qualities coming to replace old qualities. It's still the same plant, but it's also different. Things stay the same, but change, right? You said just something beautiful just now, Comrade Dwayne, I want to piggyback on. You said there's still a linkage between each stage or phase of a plant's life as a continuous historical process that is unified. Even though there are distinct identities at certain, you could say, nodal points. That's another word that us materialist dialecticians use. Nodal point just means quality shifts. What I would say is the linkage in a philosophical term, Comrade Dwayne, is that linkage, that category, that alchemy. The plant changed its qualities throughout its life. It lost the quality of being a seed, got a quality of being a plant, lost the quality of being a plant, got a quality of being a flower, lost the quality of being a flower. Now it's new seeds, right? the linkage between all those different sheddings of its old identity and the giving rise of new one is called the dialectical negation. Because we'll get back to this later. But the dialectical negation of materialist dialectics, you guys, one of its definitions, equally valid with all the others, just different levels of abstraction, like I said before, is the old is the basis for the new. And any new thing doesn't come out of nowhere, the sky or God or fucking Killer Mike's butthole. It grows out of old, previously new, already existing things that were already there. Here's another way of saying that. Everything is defined by a contradiction. And when a contradiction gets over, the result of that is the new growing out of the old. So Comrade Dwayne, the seed, the flower, and the plant, and the flower, those are all quality shifts and quality phases throughout that plant's life. They are also all contradictions that got resolved and negated and gave rise to a new contradiction. There's still continuity in the rupture. But yeah, isn't that cool? Isn't that cool?
It's very cool. And that statement alone is a negation of the idealist concept of things being inherently new, that we are
totally ruptured from the past and just deletion.
Exactly. That there's a rupture from the past, right? And that is one of the idealist concepts that undergird the delusion of, say, or the myth of, say, a place like the United States, that things are just new at all times. And so people will say, well, yes, there was genocide against the indigenous. Yes, there was chattel slavery. Yes, there were many other actions, but we had a civil rights movement. And therefore there was a break with the past, right? Or we had a gay rights movement. Therefore there was a break with the past, or an Indian rights movement, and so on. There was a break with the past, but it is impossible to have a break with the past.
Because I just want to say the materialist dialectic says there is rupture, but there's rupture and continuity.
Yes.
And the wrong thing about U.S. thinking is that they only think there's continuity. Rupture isn't wrong. Rupture is the quality shifts of something's process. The quantity shifts are when it's in continuity with its past self.
Yes.
The dialectical materialist way says there's both. They're unified in the dialectical negation, which is something going away and something new coming out, but out of that old thing. So it's going to have characteristics and birthmarks of the old thing. Shout out to Jared Ball. Shout out to Luna Nguyen and EJ and Renee. They've been doing these little sessions without me, but I'm okay with that. Of sitting in on Luna and EJ's sessions of teaching organizers and having workshops of how to use dialectical materialism. Probably much better than me, much higher level than me. I'm just a normal, lowly customer service guy with a pre-med background. Okay, I'm not an expert on this, all right, you guys? I'm just a student, right? But Comrade Dwayne, this is what Jared Ball's been saying a lot from those I've been just hearing from him, even though I haven't been able to send them. Capitalism, I'm going to skip a lot of mediations for you all, but socialism is going to have some characteristics of capitalism because it had to grow out of it. Jared has been saying a lot. Dr. Ball, shout out to Dr. Ball, shout out to Black Liberation Media. He's been saying one thing he's been learning from Luna and EJ's workshops that he's been sitting in on with Renee is that there's the past and the old and the previous always is getting dragged along into the present as the present unfolds as a process, right? We're getting a little deep and woo-woo now, but all I'm saying is Dr. Ball has affirmed this in his own way.
But this is what
Comrade Dwayne, there is always continuity and rupture. When the people think that there was an LGBT rights movement or an AIM or a Black civil rights movement, and therefore the genocide of the Ma'afa and the indigenous land theft and of the constant transphobia and queerphobia the U.S. has been defined by can just be disregarded. That is only looking at continuity without rupture. And I would say it's not the other way around is correct either. It's that you have to understand continuity and rupture exist unified in quantity and quality shifts, how all things go through. And specifically, the dialectical negation is when an old quality gives rise to a new quality, but only because a contradiction got resolved that defined that quality. And this is just what I'm saying, all of this, you guys. A quality is the same thing as a contradiction. A contradiction is what gives all qualities their identities. That's why when an old quality turns into new quality on a deeper level, it's an old contradiction negating dialectically into a new contradiction, which will still have impacts and birthmarks of the old. So there is continuity and rupture. Yes, Comrade.
We know that Marx was a true dialectician because what did he say to us, even in the manifesto, which was that the past haunts the present always.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, one of the most basic statements. And this is something that he carried forward, he and Engels carried forward in all of their writing. And of course, Engels in his own specific work on dialectics, always keeping in mind that the past haunts. And by haunt, because we know that Marx was in many ways a gothic horror writer in many.
Shout out to our horror writers, shout out to Gothic Marxism.
Actually, quite beautiful ways. He was writing
vampires, yes.
He and haunting in the sense that, and Marx meant this in a 19th century sense, which is not just it's kind of hovering in my mind. No, a haunting in that ancient sense of the presence is there, the echo is there, the thing is there. It's not, it's dead but not dead, right? And so the Roman Empire, as the Roman Empire, ceased to exist, but it's still with us in many ways, right?
It left mutual impacts that still define
Yes, that
what
still
we've inherited from
define,
it.
what Europe became. I think it was the French philosopher Simone Weil who said that when Constantine became Christian was the end of Christianity as a
Right.
revolutionary force, right? Because then once the church assumed the power of Rome, then it became something quite different from its origins, with a teacher, a rabbi in Galilee, right, or in Palestine,
Who was
right?
Palestine? And you could say the continuity was Christianity, the rupture was Christianity's revolutionary content, just in this
Exactly.
particular viewpoint.
Yes. Yes, precisely. And you don't need to be a believer to understand this. That a revolutionary moment. My God, in Rome, simply saying that you should love your brother was revolutionary enough, right? Because that society was based upon martial cruelty. So, but it hasn't gone away. It's still with us. Even
And
though there've been
that's what
ruptures.
Hegel meant by sublation, Comrade, and Marx
Yes.
too. I'm not going to get into my Hegel, but a true
Yeah.
Marxist sublation, not the Hegel kind.
Yes.
They're the same in form, but they're different in content. I'm not going to get into this with you. We're even getting into the law of the negation right now, Comrade. So if you guys are like, what the fuck is Alkmi talking about? Come back in like 10 seconds. We'll be done with this. And if you guys are like, I really fucking like what Alkmi's talking about, I'm sorry to blue ball you, as it were, but we will come back to this, just not now. This is about the law of negation, comrades. But everything in dialectical materialism is interconnected, but not interchangeable. That's what the Chinese say. So content form is related to quantity equality law, and quantity equality law has to do with quality shifts. And a quality shift, all it is a dialectical negation. And what a dialectical negation is a contradiction going away and giving rise to another one. So all the laws are related, all the categories are related. But regardless, comrade, sublation, you've heard this as a Marxist. Many people have. The German is Aufhebung, or Aufheben. Maybe the Dutch is a little similar. It just means a simultaneous. It's a very contradictory concept in a dialect. It's beautiful. It is a unity of opposing things. The non-dialectical way doesn't want you to think about change as sublation, you all. Dialectical materialism says all fucking change, all quality shifts, all negations, all processes changing are sublations. What's the sublation alchemy? It's this. It's the simultaneous overcoming, preserving, and carrying forward all at once. All at once. I'm overcoming you. I'm preserving you and retaining you. And I'm carrying you forward to a higher level that you weren't of an opposing side. Quite simply, when it comes to dialectical negations, comrade, and the dialectical understanding of the process of development of all things, the old is always in some way, in some form, in some. I'm not saying how, like Christianity or capitalism. Who decides what's negated and what's inherited is actually a question of class power. But now we're getting into politics, right? Because now we're getting into socialism, and now we're getting into all things. You guys keep the old as they're changing and becoming new things. The old is always in some way, which is relative to every single different viewpoint, right? So don't come at me with, oh, this disproves that, in a very, very general, universal way, in some form that's particular and unique to every situation and process, you guys. The old doesn't go away completely. As things change, the old is preserved in some way, is retained, and is changed and carried forward into the new. So quite literally, all things are undergoing sublations, you guys, because when all things change via quantity shifts that lead to quality shifts, the old in some fashion that's relative and particular to every single situation is not completely demolished or decimated or eradicated, but rather overcome, kept at the same time by the winning side of a contradiction, and carried forward into a new advanced stage, which will eventually return to its initial stage after two negations. That's the negation, and the spiral of development. But basically, Comrade Duane, sublation, the concept of sublation, which all things are, you've been undergoing sublation, I have, the world has, Trump has, everything changing is undergoing sublation. It's just the wrong way to think about it is things always stay the same and only grow or shrink in quantity, or things only rupture and there's no continuity of the past. Both are wrong, right? Both were European, both are very metaphysical and idealist and non-dialectical. Basically, Comrade Duane, all I'm saying here is the concept of the sublation is beautiful. Things always become new things, and they always somehow, in some way, retain the old as well. What is getting retained and what's getting filtered out and kept in the past? Ho Chi Minh said this: we have to keep old stuff that's good. We have to get rid of old stuff that's bad. That's a question of political power and who is the political actor and subject. whether it's a class, whether it's a people, whether it's a nation. Shout out to Iran and Palestine and the new African nation and our 570 indigenous nations and Puerto Rico. You guys are the subjects here, not fucking white workers. It's a political question and a power question, capital P power, like Ali Qadri says. What of the old is getting retained and what is not getting retained? You and me, Comrade Dwayne, and a class of people, and no human, not even the bourgeoisie or Trump or Elon Musk or Turkey or Erdogan, no human or class can stop the process of the old getting inherited new. That's baked in. No human can stop change from happening either. But what can be fucked with or changed or tweaked based on who holds the political reins of power of the ownership of the means of production is what from the past is getting retained and sublated and retained. Do you understand? The old is always being brought forth to the new, but because European Christian fascist Zionist capitalists and white people have been ruling the means of production for 500 years on the global system, they have been the ones driving the seat of what's getting retained from Christianity, from fat feudalism. All these things that Dwayne is talking about how the old is retaining the new, that doesn't disprove revolution. It's just saying revolution takes into account when we, the working class in the colonies, seize the means of production, then we get to be in the driver's seat of what is retained from the old and what's left behind in the past as the new is developing. We aren't in the driver's seat in a political, economic way. So retention and overcoming, retention and deletion, sublation, always happen, always, whether it's a dictatorship of the proletariat or a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. But who is in political control of a whole society's levers, Comrade Dwayne? That is what gets to decide what of the past is getting sublated, retained, overcome, and brought forth. Do you understand? So things always undergo sublations. It's just when you and me and our class takes power, we'll keep the good things out of capitalism and we'll get rid of all the bad things. Since that hasn't happened yet in Europe, when Europeans became Christian, they only sublated the things that are bad. That's all I want to say. Does that make all sense?
It makes perfect sense because, of course, you might have. It might have been said, well, when the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire, I should say, because we know that the Eastern Empire continued for quite some time after the West collapsed and became, Byzantium and quite, even though they thought of themselves as Romans, they
were Asian. Shout to the Eastern Roman Empire. They were Asian.
But they were. I mean, they called them, but they saw themselves as, and this actually is a good, it's a good illustration of what you're saying, because these were individuals who absolutely considered themselves to be Roman in the classic sense. However, they were quite different, because there had been shall we say, a change in the form, right? A form of expression of what the term Roman meant, by the time Byzantium carried on.
They retained certain characteristics.
Certain characteristics, yes, and they
overcame others.
But they overcame others, yes, and it became a quite different entity, and in many ways a negation of the European ideas of what Rome was. Now,
yes,
I'm looking at the clock, and we haven't.
Comrade, I'm sorry, I ran us up to the time.
Oh no, it's fine because we so the audience knows we have a nice shared document. So I am keeping track of where we are, and where we are is at necessity accident, actually.
Correct.
And let's see, where are we with time? Because I'm determined to be disciplined.
Call me today, right? Even with CPT, you and me came from polychronic cultures, but we're also revolutionaries. I'm an islander, you're an islander. CPT's real. It should come back eventually, right? But for now, we're under the white man's time. We can be dialectical too. Yes, I understand.
That's right. That's right. That's funny. So here's my suggestion.
Sure.
We stop here, but we know exactly where we're going to go forward, because actually, I think this will be. I think to get through this particular area, it'll probably take us about 4 episodes, because we're going to carry on, and just to give people a preview, from necessity, we'll carry on from necessity accident, and then reason result, particular general. And then we're going to go on to the 2 principles of materialist dialectics. And once that has been completed, and I'm reading from Alkmi's notes here, we'll talk about the principle of general relationships and the principle of development. And in the short to intermediate term and future pedagogical nodal points, 6 pairs and 3 universal laws of change and motion.
We'll return to the 6 pairs, you guys. Like I am kind of briefly overgoing.
And that will eventually will bring us full circle, which will be very nice.
Spiral, I would say.
Yeah, it's actually quite lovely. So even though we didn't cover all the material that we wanted to in this, it's a lot of material to cover. And I think that essence phenomena, for example, alone, and there's a reason for it. I mean, to be fair to ourselves, there's a reason for it, because these require elucidation. They require a lot of description.
Of course,
Because
of course.
what you're kind of compelled to do is to overcome our training, the training that we have been compelled to be under. Being in the system that we're under. So it's not as if we could simply launch, with these terms and people say, "Oh yes, I understand." I think it was Luna who said that. Yeah, a Vietnamese audience would go like, "Yes, of course, of course, of course."
I
I
hope
know
I'm
these
doing a
things.
good job in service of these. I don't want to mystify for people, so I'm sorry if
No,
me is
and
doing a
and
disservice
that's
to that in my
I, I
delivery. Like,
I don't think you are, but also that's one of the reasons why we're in a partnership with this.
absolutely,
Because then
absolutely.
then
You're
then we
helping me out a
can
lot, Comrade.
so then we can balance each other and bring forth and shed some light and offer examples, because I think that many of these things, and this is what's beautiful about dialectical materialism and materialist dialectics, it has to be beaten out of us. We have a natural inclination to note things
Yes,
that are
yes.
being and this natural inclination has been beaten out of us by the type of teaching that we receive under our current system in the West.
That's why many indigenous people already had a dialectical system of philosophy, ontology, and
Yes,
epistemology. We've talked about this, right, Comrade? I mean, I'm not even
yes.
saying white people can't. Humans naturally observe change, observe relationship, and observe opposition.
Precisely,
That's all it
precisely,
is. But African
precisely,
and indigenous and Latin American and Asian, we had cultures that kind of
exactly.
held on to that more in our superstructure. White people, it got beaten out of you more, and then you forced it on all of us to beat it out of us. But what Comrade Duane is saying is, it's not really human to think of things as static and disconnected,
That's
as
right.
not changing, and as
That's
one
right.
thing with one side. It's actually
Exactly.
quite human to see things as changing, as connected, and as containing opposing tendencies. But like Dwayne says, we're returning to kind of a natural state that we should be in, despite
So I think
capitalism's.
that so
So hopefully we're doing
well,
that.
and as academic and as technical as these terms may seem at first glance, at first mention, once we offer like good examples, what I'm hoping people will do is go, aha, yeah, oh, right, 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 right. Okay, I get that, because I thought this myself, but then the thought just sort of goes away because there's no support for it, right? I mean, so for example,
Exactly.
when in Western media people talk about the People's Republic, and as if it's just a billion evil people plotting the destruction of the United States. And then when you say, well, how do you get a noodle shop in Shanghai? Just basic things like what is the actual day to day life? So in order to break the spell, you
Mm-hmm.
must give concrete examples, and so that's our goal here. And I only mention this
Mm-hmm.
because, well, I mention this because I didn't want people to be intimidated by
Sorry for contributing.
this. No. It's you don't at all, because you have to, like, for example, I gave an example once of
Mm-hmm.
my favorite example, and if I probably told this story previously,
Mm-hmm.
is when in Philadelphia there's the Franklin Institute, which is one of the primary science institutes. I believe they do actual science research. I'm not sure. It's been a while. But it's mostly a children's museum at this point, at least when I left the city. Children's museum. But they had did in the past. They've done science outreach.
Yeah.
And I was at an event in South Philadelphia in which there was an astrophysicist
Mm.
who had set up a live feed from the telescope. The Franklin Institute had a solar telescope trained on the sun all the time with an appropriate filter, of course, light filter. And then this allowed you to see the sun's corona and, of course,
Yeah.
all of the activity.
A false image color of all of its different spectra of non-visible
Yes.
light, like
Yes.
X-ray, infrared. Yeah, I love those. Yeah.
But it was live, so you could see, like, of course,
That's
these
dope.
giant solar flares, and this is
Sunspots and the ejections and the
that were happening like as we were speaking. And it was a beer and burger event, so it was very
awesome.
chill. And he was an astrophysicist, and I remember asking him. I had just read about magneto hydrodynamics, right?
Right. I remember the story. You've told me the story before.
Yeah, I told the story before.
Yeah.
And he just And this is how I knew
Boom.
that he was a real scientist, right? Because what he did was, over a burger and beer, he explained the principle of magnetohydrodynamics to me. A subtle, extremely complicated, still theoretical, but probably mostly accepted at this point, understanding of how of fluid dynamics of plasma within the sun and other stars. My point being, and I say this to people often, that it is possible to describe very complex things in accessible ways, because it is within the reach of people to understand these things if they are described in a way that allows you to grab them, right? Even the most abstract things can be grabbed if they are described correctly. And that's what we're doing.
I hope I'm fulfilling, and you know, Comrade, I will make it topical, and we can end after this. But China, let me make it very basic for you guys. It's like Alkmi. Give me a sales pitch for 5 seconds. Why do I need to learn these categories? I've learned these categories from you. Why do I need to learn? I'm even applying them to my life, Alkmi. They might work, but why do I need to do this as a Marxist? Why? These are just words. I think there are two things you need to accept, and it would be really easy to understand this. Just two things. And these are basically components of materialist dialectics. Forget the laws. Forget the categories. They all come out of these two things. Here are these two things. You don't even have to be a socialist to accept these. This is just common fucking sense. You'll understand how to have the methodology, not the answer. I'm not going to give you any answers here. I'm just teaching you tools. But if you understand these two things, you guys, you will have the approach, the start of an approach to not having a bullshit fucking dingus ass idea about the People's Republic of China and why it is not neoliberal and David Harvey's wrong, why Iran is not to be undermined, why Palestine is to be supported. I can give you the start to an approach of how to get the brainworms out of your brain and not coming up with the same bullshit ass CIA propaganda funded talking points that they want you to think about enemies of the American empire. Comrade Dwayne, people don't understand China because they don't understand these 2 points. People don't understand Palestine and Iran and the necessity of them being the nucleus of global liberation, as well as Black America and the indigenous nations of Turtle Island and Abya Yala, because they don't start from these 2 points. I'm going to give you these 2 points, you guys, and you'll understand why you need these pairs. Everything in the universe is composed of and is defined by their internal and external relationships. That's called the principle of general relationships. Dwayne knows of this already, and viewers of Saturdays with Renee do too. For the new people, everything in the world is not just a thing in a system of relationships. It is a process unfolding in time and space. So everything is a process unfolding in time. That necessarily means every single thing has a history. Every single thing has a past development that led it to where the state it is occupying currently. Now, everything has a history and everything is made of relationships, internally and externally. If you understand those two things, you won't have the basis of a wrong idea of how to go about answering the questions of whether China is pro-human or not, or whether China is capitalist or not, whether Iran is dictatorial to their people or not. US America does not want you to do these two things, because when you engage in things relationally and you engage in things historically, you will understand the internal relationships that makes up China. You understand the relationship China has to its farm people and its city people, to its autonomous minorities that have a lot more rights than any minority in any bourgeois capital formation in the West, like the Uyghurs and the Tibetans and the Hui Muslims. If you don't understand things in their internal and external relationships, you have to understand a thing's identity as being defined by its internal and external relationships, and you have to understand how a thing got to where it is based on its history. If you understand those two things, you guys, that is the start of a materialist and a dialectical understanding of any process. Because essentially, you guys, I told you, if you understand a thing's internal relationships and its history, you'll understand its identity. That is what the 6 category pairs are. You guys, you have to understand relationships of chemistry and politics and of law and of physics and of mechanics and of computer science. Comrade Dwayne, we've talked about this before. But if you don't have the time to understand all these sciences, at least understand and respect these sciences, understand the universal relationships which all things share. What are those universal relationships, Alkmi? Everything embodies the relationship between reason and result, necessity and accident, content and form, particular and general, possibility, reality, and essence and phenomenon. You guys, China's internal relationships and its history are given to us, or the start of an answer are given to us when we apply these pairs to China or to Iran or to Palestine or to new Africans in America. So Comrade Dwayne, you said people, one example of non-dialectical thinking's curse on us is people not understanding what China really is. That's because they're not understanding it defined on its internal relationships, Comrade, or its history. These pairs I just have been giving with you and the audience, these are the universal relationships shared between all things, phenomenon, processes, and ideas and systems. even in nature and in human society and human thought. So the start, not the end point, but the start of a correct answer of an approach to understanding anything in this world, you guys, you have to start by understanding the universal relationships that all matter shares.
Well, on that note, and thank you.
Thank you,
Brother Alkmi. On that note, I will bid everybody adieu for this evening. So for Alkmi and myself, this is a Dialectical House Party. We'll be back with part 3 of this, in which we continue from the category pair of necessity accident. Until then, good night.
감사합니다. Thank you, everybody.